I thought it would be helpful just to think about why we're having a focus on widening participation today. It's an area that we've had a strategic focus on in Celsius for a number of years. We know that education plays a really crucial part in shaping who we are, what our aspirations are, and for many of us, what we go on to do and enjoy in life. But what we know too is that getting to and staying at college or university can be much more difficult for care experienced people, and that people with care experience can encounter significantly more barriers than people who don't have experience of care. What the data tells us is that young people who have been looked after don't attain or attend at the same levels as all other children, and they don't do that at the same age as them, which means that they often don't go into college and university in the same numbers. Really interestingly though, Neil Harrison from the Rees Centre at Oxford University has just published some research which has showed that older care experienced students who go on to university, if they can get there, they then share the same outcomes as all other university students in terms of staying on rates and the jobs that they go on to secure once they graduate. So I think that's really important for us to hold on to, and it's about how we make sure that we level that playing field about care experienced people being able to get into and stay at college and university. So for the young people where college or university is the right choice, because we also need to acknowledge that for some young people, other routes into employment will be the right choice. We need to understand what the barriers can be, how we can remove these, and when or where we can make the most difference to removing those barriers. I think in the past, widening participation or widening access activities were viewed very much as a sort of senior school phase task. The responsibility often lay with Skills Development Scotland or college and university outreach programmes or specialist third sector organisations. But I think what we've begun to understand in more recent years is the importance of widening participation at all parts of not just the education system, but also within the care system. There have been some really significant policy drivers around this. The Commission for Widening Access names care experienced young people as a group where progress needs to be made in terms of closing the gap around admissions and retention. Similarly, the Scottish Funding Council has set out their national ambition that by the end of 2021 there will be parity in the numbers of care experienced applicants and those without care experienced. And I think really importantly in the last couple of years the Promise has recognised that schools and colleges and universities are part of the important scaffolding of the care system. And I think what this really illustrates is the importance of care and education working in partnership to promote positive educational experiences. And there has been progress in recent years. This isn't a scratch start. We've seen the Care Experience Bursary implemented in recognition of the additional financial barriers that care experienced students can face. And this has now been extended into further education, and the age cap of the previous age cap of 26 being lifted to try and ensure it's as inclusive as possible for all people with experience of care. All universities have now produced contextualised admissions as well in recognition of the additional challenges that people can face in achieving the same grades at the same time as other people. And we've really seen corporate parents start to step up and step in to fulfilling their roles as corporate parents and begin to understand what their duties are around collaborating with other agencies. Further in higher education also all have named contacts for care experienced students as well. So we have seen real progress, and what we're hoping to do today is recognise some of that really good progress, have a chance to share it, but also think about what barriers still exist and what might we be able to do in our own roles to try and tackle some of that. Because widening participation can, and neither it should, make an impact on this in isolation. We can't just be starting these conversations in secondary schools. We need to be having them right from early years by everybody that works in education, care, health and the third sector. We also need to think about the role that communities, businesses and other organisations have to step up and think about how we address some of these barriers that people can face. What we do know is that if we can make education a positive experience for care experienced children and young people, they will be much more likely to return to education later on in life. And when we make these choices, we need to make sure that young people are enabled and empowered to come back to college and university so that they don't face unnecessary barriers to do that. And because our forum is made up of such a range of practitioners and leaders in the sector with roles right across the children's sector, we thought there was a real opportunity today in this forum to spend a bit of time thinking about how we work together to promote some of the positive changes in this area and celebrate some of the really good practice that we've seen in recent years as well. So without further ado, I'm going to invite Lorraine and Catherine now to come on and talk about the work that they're involved in through Edinburgh College and the Hub for Success. So I will hand over to Lorraine and Catherine.
Brilliant. Okay, let's get started. And Catherine's going to join us in a wee bit later in the presentation, but also big thanks from me to you, Catherine, for joining. I know you're really, really busy at the moment. So morning, everyone. Thanks in advance for listening. It's really appreciated. Delighted to be here. I'm aiming to try and make this session as interesting and useful as possible, but it does come with a bit of a warning. I'm not a trainer and I'm not a natural presenter. These things always make me a bit nervous, but I believe passionately that sharing our learning is really important. I think the first slide that you see on your screen here sets out my stall well and emphasises just one of my key messages today, and that is that the research tells us that next to their families, schools have the strongest influence on children's development, and the benefits of a good educational experience can be the greatest for those who need it the most. Okay, so my plan for today. So using COVID-19 to my advantage, I plan to take a blended approach to today. So I'm aiming to cover all the points that you see in the plan here, but I might not do that in order. So I just hope that you will stick with me. Also, even after all these years, a memory can drop in uninvited or sometimes unexpectedly. And if it does, and I think it's useful to our learning, I may share it. But before we get stuck in, I have two things to ask of you today. So first, bear with me, I'm using three screens and I'll probably look a bit glaikit as I'm going between the laptop camera and the other two screens. A bit glaikit, as my mum would have said when I was younger. What I would find really helpful today is if we could evaluate this session in action. And what I mean by that is if you have any comments, any points to make, any learning to share, please put them in the chat box as we go. If you find parts which resonate with you, which make you think about your practice, which just help you understand more, or equally if there's anything that needs a wee bit more exploration, please share it in the message box and that will help us in terms of our evaluation. So I'm going to start off just by setting the scene a wee bit and sharing a story of one of my penny dropping moments in my adulthood in terms of education. And it was when my daughter sent me her first text message. So it wasn't the homework from the school, it wasn't the reading, it wasn't the writing, but it was her ability to communicate with me in a way that I hadn't taught her. It really was a massive penny dropping moment for me as a mum. But it also reminded me that the power of education, it never ceases to amaze me, and that you send your kids into that building we call school, and they come out at the end of the day at some point in their development being able to read, to write, to understand what the shapes and the dots and the lines mean, and to put them together to communicate with others. Again, I'll emphasise this, I still find myself to this day underestimating what our education system does for some. The beauty and the power of education, particularly at its earliest stages, that bit when that kid walks into that school building and comes out being able to cross the T's and dot the I's. So let's rewind back several decades in time. As a young child in school, as a care experienced young child, education was a very different personal experience for me. I loved learning, I was bright and I was interested in things, and I had the ability, I think my slideshow has just changed for some reason. We'll just ignore that just now. I was bright and I was interested and I had the ability, but also and often when I got to school, I would be exhausted, smelly, hungry, upset, and on many occasions traumatised by events at home. A Monday morning, a Tuesday morning, a Wednesday morning, any morning could consist of stepping over multiple strangers, sleeping on the living room floor as I hopped around them trying to get ready for school, and my already dirty socks sticking to the alcohol-sodden carpet. In school, I wanted so much to learn, but at that point, learning wasn't a priority. The school building, the system, the timetables, the Janny, the teachers, the dinner wifeys, the assemblies, my classmates were all part of my personal care system. The routine, the stability, the kindness, the compassion, the curiosity that I experienced was profound and has impacted on me for life. And although I couldn't reach out at that time and take the biggest benefit from my education in its truest sense, It instilled in me an importance in learning in its most basic form that I carry with me today. And I think that is what school can mean for many of our children in need, and even more so for those who have experience of care. I think the impact of school is underestimated in the care system, hugely underestimated, both by those who deliver in it and the frameworks and the professionals who surround it. I can't emphasise enough the central importance school played for me in my life, not just when I got to learn, but as being a vital, beating part of my care. I've also heard and seen firsthand from children and young people that I've worked with over the last 8 years, the difference that a good school experience can make. And as my slide noted in the beginning, the benefits of a good educational experience can be the greatest for those who need it the most. So as I said, I had 2 things to ask you. The second is a question for you to think of throughout the rest of this presentation. Do you think that our schools or colleges or universities are part of the care system in Scotland? And if so, do they recognise themselves as such? Okay, that's been a short journey over a long period of time, so let's pose the question. Are the poor educational outcomes faced by our group a new phenomenon? So I am going to get back to my slideshow. Why does the education of our children matter? Back to that question. Are the poor educational outcomes faced by our group a new phenomenon? Absolutely not. Children in care experience extraordinary disadvantage. Doing well at school is unquestionably a key factor in maximising life chances. Educational attainment is strongly linked to your health. Many young people come into care with a history of educational difficulties, and their pre-care experience will mean they're always playing catch up. That's why the promise is so key. But let's move on to the next slide just to look at who we mean when we say care experience, because it means different things to different people and different experiences in different worlds, and why this matters to the work that we do at the Hub for Success. So, I know many of you in this room will know this, but I find that it never does any harm to remind ourselves. Looked after children. I don't mean care experience at this point, just our looked after, just over 14,000, a wee 2% of Scotland's children and young people. Why do children and young people come into care? Lack of parental care is still the most common ground, the most common reason for referral. And in our latest statistics, out of 12,849 kids coming into care or referred to the children's hearing, 10,823 are referred on non-offence grounds. Really, really important to remind ourselves of that. During my time at Who Cares Scotland, I spent many, many years in an advocacy role, and I had the opportunity at that point to visit every secure unit, every residential school, and many, many, many children's homes across Scotland. And in that role, I attended a huge number of children's hearings. But it's with great sadness that I can recall the number of school teachers in attendance in those hearings, which brings me back to my point before about education as part of our care system. When the people who perhaps see the child most are not in the room, then how can we make the most informed decisions? What does that tell us about our care system in Scotland? Okay, where do we live while in care? Again, many of you in the room will know this, but I just find that it does no harm to remind ourselves. So, if you are looked after at home, you have a social worker coming in and trying to help. 25% of our group remain at home on a supervision order and are a looked after child. Kinship care with grannies and aunties and uncles, sometimes friends of the family, that number is on the rise. Foster care, so biggest percentage of our group who are looked after are in foster care, and we know that the educational outcomes for that group are the best. We tiny percent now in residential, it used to be much bigger than this, and 2% in other. Now it's important to point out here that for further education and higher education in terms of the care experience bursary, it's open to a much wider group of people. So for example, if you were looked after at home, wee Jenny's looked after at home for a year between the ages of 10 and 11. She has a social worker come in, things settle down, her order is removed, she goes back home. She is a care experienced young person and she'll be entitled to the bursary. But what Jenny will not be entitled to is any support for her accommodation costs because she's not a care leaver. She wasn't looked after on or at her 16th birthday. So there's some support there, but not a huge amount. Let's think of somebody in foster care. You've got wee Jenny's in foster care and she's been there for 4 years. And at the age of 16, she still remains a looked after child. She remains in her foster placement. She goes to college or university. She gets the care experience bursary in Edinburgh. she is a care leaver. She's looked after on or at her 16th birthday, and as such, she will get support for her housing costs through her study. That's why it's important to point out the difference between looked after children, care leavers, and care experience. People often confuse this across the sector. So, who are we at the Hub for Success? So, we are a partnership approach of the 4 universities across the city. It also includes the Open University in Scotland, Edinburgh College, from where Catherine is today, New Battle Abbey, and crucially the City of Edinburgh Council. And why are these guys in the room? Well, 3 main reasons they're working together. 1, because they have a duty under Corporate Parenting Act, which makes them legally corporate parents up to the age of 26. Secondly, they're in the room because the numbers of care experienced students going straight from school into higher education are pretty low. And despite a great many widening access and participation activities delivered across our schools in Edinburgh by our partners, for example, they were finding that it was hard to reach our group. The numbers of those accessing these activities were small. And research, as Linda mentioned earlier, the Commission on Widening Access, the Blueprint for Fairness, tells us that the earlier the intervention for our group, the better. So at this point, even though we have a lot of services going to schools, they're missing out on those opportunities. But what do we do at the Hub for Success? So we're a bit of a hybrid organisation, I describe us. So we work to ensure that the support across our partner institutions is appropriate and accessible. But also we give individual advice and support directly to students to get them on the right pathway. Really important, because the financial support along those pathways is limited. We try and create connections between the Hub and other services. We also give individual advice and information to students. We challenge educational qualities across our partnership, and we give our students one-to-one face-to-face drop-in and drop-out meetings. We work in partnership with our partners, and we work in partnership with our students. We lead and develop some of the Hub's partnership and activities, and we link directly in with the Through Care and Aftercare team. We sit within that team in the City of Edinburgh Council. We work together across the partnership to keep the promise, and we take a coaching approach directly with our students and to our practice. So, we've relied heavily on the partnership during our time. And in this slide, you'll see just a wee snapshot of some of the summary of issues that we help our students with. But we couldn't help them with all these issues without the power of the partnership. We couldn't make change without our partners being in the room. If you look at the grid here, you'll see that we spend a lot of time supporting students in relation to finance. I'm not going to go into an amount of detail about that just now, but a really important part of our role that causes a huge amount of barriers for our young people. Navigating the education systems is incredibly complex. We have what's called articulation routes, which are formal. Sometimes we have informal ones, and it's often hard to know where to go to get the right package. So it's a really, really important part of our role. But as I said, we rely heavily on the partnership. We couldn't do what we do without their support, their collaborations, and giving us their time. So I am going to move on to slide 10, and I'm going to ask Catherine to join us at this time. Catherine, are you there?
I'm here, yep.
Okay, I can't see you, I can only just see my screen. So morning, Catherine, could you just remind us again who you are and what your role is?
Of course, yep. Morning, everybody. I'm Catherine McCormack, and I'm the Care Experience Lead at Edinburgh College. So we have 4 campuses, and we have Care Experience contacts on each of the campuses, and I lead the work that the college does as a corporate parent.
And what is it you particularly enjoy about your role in the college, Catherine, and working with Care Experience characters?
It's the students. It has to be the students, yeah. I mean, I've done this work now for 12 years. I was originally part of the Transition for Young People Leaving Care project in one of the legacy colleges before we became Edinburgh College. And yeah, it's the students. Yeah, I've been in the college for about 20 years. Yeah, it's the students. The connection and support, and it's not without its challenges, but yeah, I just feel that you can make a difference. I know that sounds really cheesy, but it's what I believe.
Great, thanks, Catherine. Okay, we're going to share an example of a piece of partnership work that we've done to support a young person going through the Hub for Success. And we're going to refer to this young person as Sam, and he's given us full permission to share his story. I hope this illustrates some of the work that I spoke about that the Hub does earlier. So, Sam is currently 25. He was taken into care on the grounds of parental neglect, and has a huge care experience spanning over 15 years. Usual for care experience students left school at 15, but like myself, with no qualifications. Spent some time in secure care and in a young offenders institution. Spent a lot of time being homeless. Well, as I said earlier, we sit within the City of Edinburgh Council through care and aftercare team. You'll see it referred to up in the slide as TCAC for those who didn't know it. And Sam attended a duty appointment. He was a young person from Dundee. It's important to point this out, but he was now living in Edinburgh. He attended a duty appointment because he was homeless and had no money. At that appointment, he did express an interest in wanting to move on to new things, so he was referred to the Hub for Success. At that point, he wasn't quite sure what he wanted to do. He'd done a lot of voluntary work, he'd moved around a lot. He was then had a few ideas, and we supported him to apply to college. And at that point, he applied for events management. But if you remember, Catherine, events management wasn't running that year, so he made a different choice, didn't he?
That's right. Yeah, he moved to hospitality.
That's right, yeah. So over to you, Catherine. He then found himself being coached about his potential. We were positive about his abilities, and we were curious about his care experience so that we understood where he was coming from and so that we could help guide and direct him into the place he needed to be. So without further ado, he ended up in Edinburgh College, and that was a life-changing moment for him. So Catherine, could you tell us about when you first met Sam and some of the supports that Edinburgh College gave?
Of course, yeah. So I first met him. I jotted down some notes so I could remember because it's quite a story. So I first met him in February of last year. Now, prior to first meeting him, there'd been lots of communications back and forth with Lorraine and I over funding, accommodation. So I had a bit of knowledge before I met him. So I often find when you meet a student for the first time, they sort of fall into two categories. One that tells you very little, which is absolutely fine, and others who tell you their whole life story in 2 minutes. And Sam was one of these students. He arrived at Milton Roads, came into the office, sat down and just told me everything. We had a really good, honest, open, positive conversation, but it was very clear that there was a lot of anger about both the care system, about education, where he was in life. And I felt it was important. And I think one of the things that came across really strongly was he felt that decisions had been made for him and he was fed up with people telling him what to do. So I felt it was very important that I made him aware of the support that was available in the college, but that it was up to him how he accessed that support. And I would support him to access the support, but ultimately it was his decision. So I introduced him to his care experience campus contact down at the Granton campus where he was studying. I introduced him to one of the learning support team because he had spoken about some dyslexic tendencies he thought he may have. I made him aware of our wellbeing team and of the counselling support. And he agreed that I could share some information with his course leader, and we arranged that we would meet up again in 2 to 3 weeks and that he could email me and that we would have an open line of communication. Do you want me to just keep going, Lorraine, or do you want to chip in?
That's great, I'll chip in. So just as you said, Catherine, before it was a challenge. We were having to go back and forward to each other. We were having to reassure some of the staff that were working with Sam within, who were finding some of his behaviour, as you said, challenging. Back to just point something out, back when Sam came to the initial appointment, he did become quite aggressive and challenging and was asked to leave the building and then refused to get back in. But that caused us a problem because our service were based within that building and he wasn't aggressive towards us in the hub, it was towards the staff there. So even at that point, he was very, very presenting some challenging behaviour, but at the same time, an incredibly easy and likeable character. So what myself and Catherine done at that point is COVID hit, and he found himself in the student accommodation quite isolated, and Catherine's team stood up to that challenge and made sure that they checked in with him regularly, as we did at the hub. And one of the issues we found ourselves in, Catherine, was getting the funding for his housing costs, because we wanted him to be able to stay put. He spent a lot of time in homeless accommodation, and he was already worried about where he was going to go for the summer. Do you want to talk a wee bit about what happened with the summer accommodation, Catherine?
Yeah, so as Lorraine says, I mean, one of the first things he said to me actually when I met him was, what's going to happen in the summer with my accommodation? So as Lorraine said, immediately that was a concern. So it wasn't easy. It took quite a lot of negotiation, a lot of partnership working. So it was agreed that he could stay in the accommodation in the college over the summer. And I think it's important at this point we say he wasn't going to be continuing as an Edinburgh College student. He was moving on to another institution, but it was recognised that there wasn't an alternative. We couldn't have him becoming homeless. We had accommodation. He'd built up a fantastic relationship with the accommodation manager, who was a really strong source of support for him. So we felt he had to, absolutely he had to stay with us. So it was agreed that he could remain in the accommodation over the summer, but because he wasn't going to be an Edinburgh College student, we weren't able to access the discretionary funds to pay for the accommodation costs, which is where the hub came into force. And one of Lorraine's team did a brilliant job and managed to secure the funding. And I have to admit, Lorraine, I can't remember which charity it was, but we managed to secure the funding for the summer costs.
That's right. And at that point, he then applied to Newbattle Abbey College, also one of our partners, to do the Prep for Further Education course. And he moved from Edinburgh College into Newbattle Abbey's accommodation, which was brilliant. He's thrived there, he's doing really well, and he's now at the stage where he's been offered a conditional place at Edinburgh University. Fantastic piece of partnership work. He would not have got there if it wasn't for Edinburgh College and the impact that they did. That bit keeping him, I think, over the accommodation was a phenomenal piece of corporate parenting, because the challenges that come with even things like insuring students who are not your own students, you had to go down lots of hurdles. So a great experience. I'm just going to stop there. We can always come back to Sam later in our discussions if we can. Thank you so much for that, Catherine. I know we have a huge amount more to share, and I know that Sam sent you a beautiful email to say thanks for all your support. Do you want to just quickly mention that before we move on?
I do. So this was on the 3rd of March after he'd received his conditional offer, and he sent this to his lecturer and copied me in. You believed in me when I didn't believe in myself, and you pushed me to be a new Sam, and I feel as if that's happened now, and I just wanted to thank you and the rest of the lecturers and college staff who pushed my boundaries and pushed me to become the person I am today.
Beautiful, thank you. Okay, so a brilliant success story with a lot of work, but he absolutely deserves to have that place at Edinburgh University. That's his goal. He's applying to study politics. Okay, let's just shift on a wee bit, and we're going to jump from Sam to look at what actually happens at school for our care experienced students or our looked after children. So these statistics I have to highlight are for our looked after population, because we don't have a data set for care experienced students at the moment. So we all know this, that our students, if you look at the first column on the left-hand side, that over 40% of our students still leave school at the age of 16. If you look to the right-hand side, you will see that they leave with very few qualifications. That we have known for a long time. Back to what I said before, this is not a new phenomena. Here's where our guys go when they leave school. So if you look at school leavers who were looked after in the last year, 5% go straight to higher education. That means HNC and above at college and at university, compared to 30% of all school leavers. 37%, interestingly, higher than all school leavers going to further education. Hugely important part of the journey for a care experienced student. Interestingly, I often hear the colleges, and Catherine has done this as well, refer to themselves as the poor partner or the poor cousin. Yet I would argue actually the opposite in relation to care experienced students. They are indeed the poor partner when it comes to the economic argument, but more importantly, I see them as the big sister to the universities. The big sister getting the bairn up in the morning, combing their hair, making sure they've got their bus fares and their lunch money, but most of all, like Catherine mentioned, telling them they can be a new you and that they deserve this opportunity, instilling and encouraging them to believe in themselves. So I take my hat off to the colleges, and I've seen them as big sisters in action. They take a trauma-informed, relationship-based approach to their practice, and DNA is at the heart of the college in terms of this is just what they do. This is just a wee peek at Care Experience undergraduate entrance into university, and if you look to the bottom right hand side, you will see that 505 Care Experience students went into university across 2018 to 19, about 0.7% of the population, so a tiny wee number. Let's go and look. You mentioned this earlier, Linda. This is really, really important for Care Experience students. The number of Care Experience students who perhaps leave school at a young age, go off, work, do whatever, come back in much higher numbers than anywhere else. So you look at the age 25 and over category, and in 2017 to 18, this is the most recent stats from the Scottish Funding Council, the highest number was those in the over 25 category. That is why the Care Experience bursary for the older age group is so important, because if you don't have that financial support, you may not be able to get in. Also, college is the biggest feeder to all of our universities across our partnership, the hugely important big sister in the room. Let's have a wee look at the age group of those getting into university. Again, you will look at the numbers. The highest number is aged 25 and over. So widening participation doesn't just apply to early years, to secondary school, it applies absolutely at college and at university as well. So, we have a big task on our hands and we must stick to the promise. We must reach earlier in our widening participation programmes in schools. Indeed, this has been mentioned several times, but COWA, the Commission on Widening Access, and the Blueprint for Fairness also evidences the need to go back much earlier for our group. But we simply can't ignore the fact that the poor educational outcomes for our group is not a new phenomenon. There's research as early as the 1960s which highlights that the educational outcomes for those in state care, as they referred to it then, were poor. There's a little more interest in the 1970s, but some 50 years later, have we made significant change? We cannot, and most importantly, must not try to make these changes alone. It simply won't work. As they say, it takes a village to raise a child, and our children deserve it more than most. But widening participation should not be confined to schools. We need to share our efforts so that those with care experience, those numbers that come back over the age of 25 with a thirst and a drive for learning, are also seen through the lens of widening participation and given every opportunity to learn. So I urge you to look at the promise, which is responsible for driving the work of change demanded by the findings of the Independent Care Review. And the promise works with all kinds of organisations to support shifts in policy and practice and culture so that we can keep the promise and make sure that our care experience infants, children, young people and those adult returners have every chance that they can get. But we need to bear in mind that education providers are not solely responsible for the educational outcomes of our group. Stability in itself is not sufficient. It has to be combined with someone committed to helping that young person, that adult, and providing a supportive and encouraging environment for study. So, I hope I've kept within time, and if I have, you can let me know, Michelle, and I will hand back over and stop sharing at that point. Thank you so much for your time.
Lorraine, Catherine, thank you so much for that. That was a really, really powerful input. I think Sam's story just it brings it home to us all, and I think we all know a Sam. We've all worked alongside a Sam, and really striven to try and improve circumstances for young people that are in those situations. And Lorraine, I said this to you on the phone last week when you described college as a big sister, and I don't know if it's because I'm a big sister myself, but when you're describing getting lunches ready, make sure you've got bus fares, make sure people are up in the morning, I just think it's the best analogy for how colleges support our young people, and I really see those parallels between the being a big sister and the role that college plays. I also really enjoyed watching both of your faces when you were talking about your favourite part of the job, and that was working with students. And I don't know about anybody else on here, but I find myself smiling watching you smiling, thinking about all the young people that you work with and the ones that you've known over the years. So thank you again for sharing that. I really, really appreciate you taking the time and coming along today to help set the context around this. What I will do is we've asked everybody in each group for 2 examples that you discussed. I'm really, really aware of time and getting finished up at 11 o'clock, so if I could just ask people to be aware of that when they're feeding back on behalf of their on behalf of their group. So I will come to, because you're first on my screen, Larissa's group first, ask for your examples.
Okay, Linda, I'm going to feedback because we really literally had maybe 10 minutes of discussion with the challenges, and nobody felt comfortable to understandably new feedback given the challenges there. So I think the key examples for us that we managed to talk about were the partnership very much with SDS and in some local authorities. That has been down maybe as far as sort of S3, possibly S2. Again, it was raised, but foster carers as well, mentioning that's a real challenge. So if we can get that partnership early, and there is some good practice across the country where SDS are beginning to work more closely with social work, so it's not just about education. So again, like we've said, it's that full wraparound support that everybody's working collectively. So that was one area we looked at. The other part that again we talked about was maybe some of the role of virtual school heads. We know that that's something that's up and coming in Scotland, and we had a representative who was a virtual school head in England, and talked a lot about that, working that partnership in that 16 plus, and having an identified person there to support young people who are moving on, whether into further and higher education, that continued support there. So I guess that was the two key points that were raised within our group.
Thank you, Larissa. And I think that partnership one is a real theme that's ran through today from what Lorraine and Catherine were talking about. It's obviously been discussed in your group, and I think it was very key in our group too. So thank you very much for feeding back. I saw we note in the chat that Greg's doing the feedback for his group, but he has to leave early. So Greg, what breakout room were you in, Greg? Who were you with?
Michael in a group C.
Grand, thank you. So please feel free, Greg.
Is okay? Is my sound coming through? Because we had some issues with my microphone.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah, that's fine. Just a couple of things in, and then I'll need to shoot off. We had the chat about the broad school experience, I guess, for young people who are in the care system, and it can be obviously a continuum, some positive, some not so positive. But if in that positive sense, a negative sense that someone's maybe not had a great experience of the education system, quote unquote, does that impact on their ambition to stick with further engagement in the wider system, obviously FE and HE sector? So it's how do we mitigate against that, support that if it's happened, to build someone back up and keep them focused. The other broad area, and I'll kind of mesh, if it's okay, on behalf of the group, a couple of points. We talked about I guess the age and stage dilemma, that if someone again go through a care experience journey, is going to need a bit more time to make that transition. It's, again, as corporate parents, are we doing enough to recognise that delayed transition and providing the relevant support and coaching along the way and consistency, so that folk, if it's their 30s, that's their time of blooming, we're there to help that momentum to develop and to engage. So there's that broader age and stage discussion. We also within that recognise the learning that can come from trying stuff out rather than in formal education settings. So we talked about work experience, whether it goes well or doesn't go so well. We're trying as corporate parents to coach and reflect on what was the learning from that scenario, and that that career transition learning comes from a whole range of experiences, not just within a formal education setting. And it's as I guess as mitigating and trying to address barriers, that might be one aspect. So maybe a wee bit kind of jumbled up there, but hopefully I've covered a couple of points in enough depth. Thank you.
Not at all, Greg. Thank you very much. And I think, definitely getting the sense that there's been very similar themes discussed in each of the areas. And I think that age and stage one is one that we've been having for quite a while now, and that's really relevant. think particularly after the pandemic, and thinking about individualised support for children and young people as well, based on what they need rather than where they are. So thank you for flagging that. I will come to Lorraine's group now. Lorraine, I can't see you. I'm sure you're
Yep,
still here.
still here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, so similar, we had very practical examples of good practice. So again, work experience, which Greg mentioned before, also apprenticeship opportunities. Stephen from St Philip's also mentioned putting on an event as in his role as a teacher, is bringing in businesses and FE and HE providers into that space and allowing young people quick timed opportunities to speak in an environment where they felt comfortable thinking about where they want to go next. And we had some key learning from some of the staff that work within the residential units and just about how much they support their individual young people to access education opportunities, but the challenges that come along with that when a child or young person has been through so much that are they at that stage and age and space where they can learn to develop. So some really varied examples of good practice from across the sector, and I think just the commitment in the room to collaborate is key.
That's great, Lorraine. Thank you very much. And again, that collaboration, age and stage, I think there's been really similar themes discussed by everyone. In our group, we were going to give a couple of examples. So, Eileen, I can see, there you go. Eileen, if you could talk about what's happening in your school.
Yeah, thanks, Linda. We are a school for children with complex additional support needs, working from age 6 to 16. And we already do a lot of employability skills in the upper stages of the school, connecting with SDS, apprenticeships and work experience, etc. But we've just secured money from Children in Need. We've got a grant to employ an employability mentor who will be working across the school. So we're really looking at the developing the young workforce resources and activities right throughout the school, and we've also put that into our school improvement plan as one of our priorities, is how we ensure that all our children are getting access to developing the young workforce skills. Yeah, so we're really looking forward to trying this out for the year and then hopefully see if we can extend that beyond that year of the grant.
Thank you, Eileen, for sharing that. I'd be really interested to hear how that goes. We talked in our group about how because that's covering the full spectrum of the school, right from age 5. That's a really interesting approach to doing things. So please keep us up to date on how that goes. And thank you for sharing. And the other person in our group that was going to feedback was Gronya.
Hi, yeah, I'm Gronya. I work for STS in West Lothian, and I flagged up something which our local authority had put in place with it was like an outreach teaching team for looked after children, and they had a specific post within that team from CMC where they were able to link with us to help us link with them and to help to sort of support and get people into sort of positive destinations. Can everyone hear me okay? Yeah, okay. So I can hear something else in the background, and I wondered. So it's been really positive because then it's meant we've been able to have those young people flagged up to us early on, and we know where they are, because as we know, a lot like looked after young people can move at very short notice as well. Because we're a national organisation, it means then we can help support that journey as well with them in the other local areas. So that has been a really positive experience, and it's also helped me when I've gone into residential units to work with young people as well, because they've been linking with that team, so then it's meant that it's been easier to build that relationship as well. So that's been a really positive experience. That post I think is shortly coming to an end because they're moving some things around. I'm not sure what the future will happen, whether that will be replaced with with somebody else or what's going to happen, but it has for us as an organisation, and hopefully for the young people as well, been really positive. So that was sort of what we were speaking about, and I don't know if that happens locally in other areas, but certainly it certainly helps us, because it included young people in residential services as well, like in residential schools, sorry, who were maybe returning to the area as well. So, and we also link in anyway with the through care and the aftercare teams, but this really helped us sort of dig a bit deeper, I think, really was the positive from that.
Thank you very much for sharing that, Gráinne. And in our group we had a bit of a discussion about talking about building the capacity and the skills of parents and carers and other organisations as well, which I think when we think back to what Lorraine was talking about in terms of education being part of the care system, it's about that building capacity and understanding each other's roles and how the work we're all doing is mutually reinforcing, I think. So thank you very much for sharing that. And I'm just going to come to Lorraine really quickly to see if, Lorraine, if there's anything that before we finish up that you want to reflect on or add in. So Lorraine, I think you're on mute.
It'd just be great to ask that question again of people in the room. If you can see your little hand function, I can see quite a lot of you on the screen now. Do you think education, and I mean schools, college, universities, do you think they see themselves as part of the care system in Scotland? Could I have a wee show of hands if you agree? Could you pop your hands up?
Or put it in the chat box.
Yeah. I think they do an amazing job at being part of the care system, personally myself, but I'm not sure that they see themselves in that role. Educators are taught to educate, but they make a huge difference in children and young people's lives in terms of that stability and that safety that I alerted to earlier. So I just wanted to ask that. It's interesting to see. I don't see any hands up at all.
No. In the chat, people are saying some of the non-mainstream do. Like some people will, but not everyone. Similar to what you were saying, Lorraine, that they don't see themselves in that role. But I think some people might not recognise that is what they're doing and the importance of the work that they do. Some individual teachers might, and other education people do, but not everyone does. And I think this comes down to our education conference had a theme of corporate parenting. It'll be 3 years ago now since we had to miss last year and this year. But yeah, 3 years ago now we had education as a corporate parent as a theme for our conference, and it was really, really interesting listening to the discussion in the room, because it was quite a new thing for a lot of people in the room. Historically it had been seen very much as a social work role, and if people understood it as an education task, they thought it sat very much with the head teacher, and quite a lot of discussion about, well, how could individual teachers or individual education staff actually make a difference. So we spent quite a lot of time, exactly as you and Catherine talked about this morning, as we've discussed in the breakout rooms, the importance of those individual relationships, about meeting children where they're at, about recognising that it's not a one size fits all approach. So, and I think just from the discussions that we've had today, it's clear that work is getting out there, and I think it's just about continuing to fight the good fight. So what we will do is we'll save all this chat to reflect the question that you asked, Lorraine, and we can send it out as part of the materials. But that's us on 5 to 11. I can't believe where the time has gone this morning. Just before we finished up, I just want to flag a couple of things so that people are aware. We have got a new webpage on the Celsius website, detailing the work that we're doing with the Virtual School Head Teachers network. So please go on and check that out. We also have a paper that we've produced, which is a practical guide for SQA coordinators and designated managers to support people that are involved in the teacher estimate process, and the additional considerations that might be required for care experienced pupils. So if you're in that role, or you know anyone that it's relevant to, please feel free to share that paper with them. Very relevant to our theme today is that the Open University in Scotland now has a training module available on corporate parenting in higher education, which is available free to all colleges and universities in Scotland, and it can also be customised to align with specific aspects of each institution. So we'll send out a link to this in our follow-up email, but you can also search for it on the OU website. And last but certainly not least, Inquire are doing a Facebook Live question and answer session on the 28th of April at 11 o'clock on the topic of care experienced children and additional support for learning. So again, we will send out the link in the follow-up to this, but feel free to go on Inquire's website to get further details of that. I know that additional support for learning is a topic that we talk about a lot in this area for care experienced children and young people, and the Inquire events are always a really nice way to get answers to commonly asked questions as well. So finally, I just want to let people know that we will wrap up all this material that we've produced today and send it out to everyone as a bit of a follow-up, and I'll put more information in on the Inquire event and the OU in Scotland corporate parenting module as well. Our next forum meeting is on the 12th of May, and we will send an email again with more details once registrations are open. But finally, I just want to say a big thank you to Larissa and Michael for the facilitation and bearing with us with that, for Lorraine and Catherine for coming along and the really powerful input that helped set the context for the session, to Michelle and Laura and Celsius, who are behind the scenes trying to make all this work for us, and a big thank you to all of you as ever for coming along, for engaging, for being so motivated and up for the chat around the issues in this area. So thank you.